אוקיי, אז ברוכים הבאים וברוכות הבאות לעוד חגיגת למידה, במפגש האחרון שלנו בשנה השביעית של שפה על הספה. אני לא מאמינה שאנחנו כבר בשנה השביעית. אה, הש... יש כאן אנשים חדשים ואנשים ותיקים, יש כאן פרצופים חדשים ופרצופים ותיקים. אני רק אציין לפני כל אלה שהם חדשים, שהמפגשים האלה הם בעצם אקדמיה מקוונת למורים לעברית כשפה שנייה, אבל גם למורים משפות אחרות. יש כאן מורים לערבית שמצטרפים אלינו מדי פעם, מורים לאנגלית שמצטרפות, מורים ומורות לאנגלית שמצטרפות אלינו גם, אז אני מאוד שמחה על המקום הזה, ואני מאוד גאה שיש לי גם קבוצה שממש הולכת איתי לאורך כל השנים, אז באמת תודה על התמיכה ותודה על הלמידה השיתופית. יש לנו היום במפגש מורים מישראל, מורים מארצות הברית, מקנדה, מפרגוואי, באמת מכל רחבי ארצות הברית, אז באמת תודה לכם שאתם כאן. שוב, מצטרפים אלינו אנשים, מורים ומורות שמלמדים בכל מיני גילאים, אוניברסיטאות, בתי ספר יהודיים פרטיים, בתי ספר פאבליק סקולס שמלמדים שם עברית, יש כאלה כמה. אז באמת ברוכים וברוכות הבאות. אני רק רוצה להגיד כמה דברים לפני שאני מתחילה. אני אשלח את המצגת הזאת למי שצריכה, ומי שעוד לא כל כך מכירה אותי, כי מתברר שיש עוד כמה שלא מכירים. אז קודם כל אני רוצה לדבר על הפלטפורמה, The Bionic Language Teacher. אם יש כאן מורים ומורות שעוד לא מכירים, לא יודעים, אני אשמח להיפגש ולהסביר לכם על הפלטפורמה הזאת, שהיא למעשה ארגז כלים חדשני ומדהים למורים ומורות לשפה, לעברית, וגם למורים ולמורות לשפות אחרות. אז אנחנו במפגש שלנו של שפה על הספה, יש לנו שנה שביעית כבר, יש את קבוצת הפייסבוק, 972 Educators, שם יש המון חומרים שאפשר פשוט להיכנס ולקחת, אז אתם מוזמנים ומוזמנות. מי שעוד לא מכירה את הפודקאסט העברי הראשון להוראת שפה שנייה, בשפה אחת על שפה שנייה שלי ושל רונית רון ירושלמי, אתם מוזמנות ומוזמנים להאזין לנו גם בספוטיפיי וגם בפייסבוק, סליחה, ביוטיוב. הכנס הרביעי יוצא לדרך, והוא יהיה בשניים ובשלושה באוגוסט. הנושא שלו זה הטכנולוגיה כמאיץ רכישת השפה העברית והתרבות הישראלית. אני ממש ממליצה להירשם עד ה-20 לחודש, המחיר הוא מחיר מוזל, מלאחר מכן המחיר יעלה, יש כבר כמה שנרשמו, השבוע אני הולכת לפרסם את כל הדוברות, זה כנס נשי כזה שלנו, וכל הדוברות יפורסמו במהלך השבוע הזה, והתכנים פחות או יותר כבר ראיתם, מי שעוקבת אחרי הפרסומים שלי.
אורלי,
כמובן,
בטופס הרשמה כתוב 5 ביולי. אני שלחתי את זה בזה שרק תבדקי, או שאני עשיתי טעות, אז רק תבדקי אחר
אוקיי,
כך.
אני אבדוק. יש לי גם קורסים, אם אתם מעוניינים ומעוניינות להצטרף, אז בבקשה לפנות אליי. אני לא אדבר על כל המיזמים, אפשר לצפות ולראות גם בקבוצת הוואטסאפ וגם בקבוצת הפייסבוק שלי. וללא עוד הקדמות, שזה היה ככה בחטף ומהיר, כי יש הרבה מה להגיד, אבל אין לנו הרבה זמן, ואני רוצה לתת את הזמן לגברת לסלי גראן. לסלי, יש לה 27 שנות ניסיון בהוראת שפות בחטיבת הביניים ובבתי הספר התיכוניים, ו12 שנות ניסיון במטה המינהלי, ולאחרונה היא מתאמת שפות עולם במערכת החינוך הציבורית של מחוז הווארד במרילנד. והיא מרצה לעתים קרובות גם בכנסים ארציים, גם בכנסים אזוריים ולאומיים, והיא מתמחה בפרקטיקות הוראה מיטביות. היא יוצרת ומפתחת משאבים לתמיכה בהוראה ובלמידה של שפות, ומשתפת אותם באתר האינטרנט שלה. יש לה אתר, website, and she will share, Leslie will share with us everything that she has to share with us. והיא גם שותפה לכתיבת הספר, The Keys to Strategies for Language, for Language Instruction, sorry. וכיהנה כחברה בוועדת המנהלים של הארגונים ACTFL, NACTFL, NADCFL. So Leslie, with no further ado, the sofa is yours, and you will be able to share all your information with us. Let me just stop share my screen. And we're going to talk about student agency, which in Hebrew we say פעלנות. ומצאתי עוד מילה, do being. do being, זה גם שהתלמידים doing והם גם being in the process. So, Leslie, the sofa is yours. Thank you, really. I want to thank you, really, for being here and sharing with your knowledge. I follow Leslie for many, many years on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, everywhere. And I try to soak as much as information I can. And I'm so glad you agreed to present to our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I feel like we know each other well, even though we haven't ever met in person.
Right.
Because I've also followed your work, and it's amazing what you're doing for Hebrew teachers and Hebrew education in general in the States and beyond. So that's awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm coming to you from Maryland, Howard County, which is between Baltimore and Washington. I'm a retired supervisor of languages. I supervised about 200 world language teachers here in Howard County for 8 languages, K to 12. So I give you an idea of my context. Since I've retired, I spend my free time creating, curating, collecting resources for teachers to make your lives a little bit easier. So if I hear from a teacher like, oh, I used that and it made things so easy, it just makes me so happy because I know how stressed out teachers are right now. I know how difficult it is to engage students in 2026. And I'm doing everything I can to put resources out there. And I do that for free through my website, through other venues, which I'll show you right now. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So as you can see on the first slide here, I'm on Blue Sky, X, and Instagram, and all you have to remember is Grahn for Lang. So my last name, Grahn, for as in foreign, Lang as in language. When I retired, I tried to make everything in my life parallel, so it was easy to find. You'll see above that, www.grandforlang.com is my website. And on the far right there, you'll see that on Pinterest, it's Grahn for Lang as well. And on Pinterest so far, I have over 22,000 pins collected, mostly by topic, but then also by bigger kind of pedagogical ideas like flexible grouping strategies, thinking routines, classroom management, things like that. And so as many different topics as I could for teachers. And because I haven't done a lot of work with Hebrew teachers, preparing for this session has been fun because I went out there to find lots of different Hebrew resources that are out there, and I'll share some of those with you during our time together. So let's get started. So one of the things I want us to think about from the beginning is that when students receive a textbook or when they receive the curriculum or the syllabus for a course, they typically feel like it's something that it's a list of things you're going to do to them, right? And so, oh, she's going to teach me this, then she's going to teach me that, then she's going to teach me that, right? And so agency is about students seeing what we are going to teach them as something they have a voice in. So I just want you to kind of ruminate on that a little bit, right? So what do I mean by that? So in other words, they have a say about the trajectory of the course or the trajectory of the time that you spend together. So it's not all predetermined. It's something that they might be able to contribute to in some way. And this is a huge thing because I know lots of teachers I work with across the country are experiencing challenges trying to engage these Generation Z learners, especially after COVID, when students were very much tied to their devices. And now we've asked them to come back to school and actually look up and look at each other and talk to each other and communicate with one another. And they would much rather do it on their device, right? They'd much rather be disconnected. And so that whole idea about what if we gave them some voice in what we are doing together in our learning, it may motivate them to be more involved in their learning. And so that's kind of the foundational piece of what we're going to talk about today. And so we'll start out by just talking about like what student agency is. And Orly has already shared with you how the agency is expressed in Hebrew. And you'll see on this slide, there's lots of different things I've collected around the topic of student agency. And so from all that information, basically it starts with how student-centered is what we're doing. So is it very teacher-centered where I'm doing all the talking and every once in a while a kid gets to answer something or write down something? Or are they actively involved in our lessons? And so you can see it goes from compliance to engagement to empowerment. So how can we move students from just being compliant in our classes further down this continuum and feel like that they have power in the classroom? And so from the website called renaissance.com, here is their definition of student agency. And I want you to notice the blue highlighted words in the definition. So the blue highlighted words are meaningful, relevant, interests, self-initiated, voice, and choice. Now, voice and choice are the little kind of catchphrase that goes along with student agency, right? So student agency equals students having a voice and students having choices. And so just by looking at that quote, think about what you teach, the content that you teach. Is it meaningful to students? Is it relevant to them? Meaning, can they attach it to their real lives? Do they feel like some of what they're learning they got to initiate? And are you asking for their voice in what they're learning and also offering choices? And so that one slide kind of summarizes that big idea of student agency. And so more about student agency from that same website. And the piece of it that I think is most important, again, is the part that I highlighted in blue. It triggers a greater investment of interest and motivation. So if we're dealing with students who don't feel very motivated or interested in what we're doing, agency can definitely positively impact that situation. And so that's why I ask teachers to consider what can we do to make students agents of their own learning. And so one of the things I've done is I've gone to a website, and Larry Ferlazzo is pretty famous online for many, many years because he started out putting a lot of technology things out in the early 2000s when none of us were really thinking about technology yet. And then he still is producing things online. And he came up with this list, or I took this list from his article of aspects about our instruction that would increase student agency. And you'll see I have a QR code on the screen. So if you want to scan it on your phone, what I've designed is just like a little checklist card that if you wanted to, you could print out and then kind of compare it to your lessons, right? So he talks about positive self-talk and mindset. So again, growth mindset has been a big kind of social emotional kind of topic that we've talked about over the last several years. Yes, I believe I can do it. I believe that mistakes are okay because mistakes help me learn. Just giving students the right mindsets as language learners. Do we have students set goals often for themselves? So by the end of this marking period, by the end of this course, by the end of this month, whatever the timeframes are, I want to be able to be at this level. So I want to be at a novice high level or a intermediate low. And that's, of course, the ACTFL language. In the European framework, it would be, I'd like to move from an A1 to an A2 or from an A2 to a B1. And so kids are thinking about how they're increasing their fluency and their proficiency in the language. They're not always counting on me as a teacher to tell them where they are in their proficiency. Metacognition, thinking about their thinking. And so how can we help kids think about how words go together to make sentences? What words do I need to be able to react to somebody else, right? So for them to think about how they think, teach them about their brains, which I love that because we don't spend a lot of time talking about memory, for example. So what does short-term memory look like? What does long-term memory look like? What do I need to do in order to get something to stay in my long-term memory, right? And so to talk about those kind of things, and that's a very kind of popular topic right now, is that kind of effortful thinking and how can I make things stick? Student reflection, students teaching others, because we know if you can teach somebody else something, you really know it, right? And so that's kind of at the top of the pyramid. Encouraging action on justice issues. So students are always thinking about, so what am I going to do with this thing you taught me? So you taught me a unit about family. Okay, what am I doing with it? How am I changing anything? And Gen Z is very much wrapped into how am I going to positively impact the world in some way? Student choice and voice, there's that catchphrase. And I need appropriate feedback from my teacher. So I need specific feedback so that if I just did a writing piece and I gave it to my teacher, I need much more than good job or here are all the errors you made and we made red circles all over their paper. But instead, next time, try to add more detail to your sentences. Next time, try to add more connector words or transition words. And so we're giving them concrete things they could do to increase their proficiency in the particular unit that you're working on. And so what I'd like for you to do is just stop for a moment and think about a recent lesson that you taught. It can be one at any level, so it could be for beginners or more advanced students. But I just want you to pause and think about, were any of those aspects, any of those characteristics of ways to increase student agency in your lesson plan? So for example, let's say that you offer choice in some way. So during a independent work time, they could either do this or they could do that. Then you would check that off as one of the characteristics of student agency. So let me give you a moment just to think about that. Okay, so if anybody would like to share anything, I'd invite you to put something in the chat, or you can turn on your mic. What did that make you think about when you stop and think about, okay, did I put agency into my lesson? And then the second piece would be, what could you do to change that lesson to add agency to it. So it could be something as simple as instead of having a single task, there was a choice of tasks, right? Or there was an opportunity for kids to work together and teach each other, right? And so those kinds of ideas, peer feedback, reciprocal teaching, that kind of idea. Does anybody have anything they want to share?
I'll be honest, I don't have on every lesson plan I have, student teaching each others or student choosing, from two options what to do, either to write a letter to the spy we're reading about, or either to open a Facebook page, fake book page for. But when I do create a project-based language learning unit, I really make sure that all these things are in it.
And I don't think the expectation is all of these things are in a single lesson.
Right.
But if I look at a series of lessons across time, am I peppering these things in over time? Because I know it empowers the students, right? So I think it would be difficult to put it in every single lesson, but it's a great way to go back and look at how could I've added some sort of aspect of student agency to that lesson. Okay, so next I want to talk about, so what does agency have to do with engagement? And so we know that students can be, it can be a struggle to engage all students in our classrooms. Our classrooms are more diverse than ever, right? So we have kids that are at all different places and all different levels of proficiency, all different mindsets, right? And then I'm trying to meet the needs of all of those students at once. And so as I'm trying to move towards a more student-centered type of classroom, and please notice that I took this from a article called Why Student Engagement is Important in a Post-COVID World, right? And so people are thinking about these things. And it's because we know kids want to collaborate with each other. And so are we making sure that in our lessons, there's time for them to work with a partner or in a small group? Students want to take on a role or responsibility. An example would be if you always kick off your lesson with a calendar talk, like what's today, what's tomorrow, what's the weather like, things like that. Instead of you leading it all the time, are we handing it over to students? Once they've heard you do it several times, they know exactly how to do it, or you create a little chat mat for them. Let them lead that part of the lesson. And so that whole idea, by them taking ownership, by them playing a role, they are more engaged. Are students monitoring their own engagement? Are they thinking about, I don't know, how much did I participate today? How engaged was I? And again, it's much more useful to the student for them to think about that than for me to tell them how engaged they were. And then the other thing is make sure there's rigor in the tasks. I think about what I call my advanced learners in my classroom who would do everything I asked them to do. So I give them a task, they would do it very quickly, they'd turn it over on their desk, and then they'd read a novel under their desk. Because that task did not make them think at all. And so it was not rigorous enough. And so they didn't feel like it was worthy, right? They just did it to make me happy, get their points, whatever the reason is that they complied, but they weren't really engaging their brains in the activity. And so some things we want to do to get kids engaged are make those real life connections. And so if we're talking about technology, for example, we want to make sure we're connecting with the type of technology students are currently using. So we can't ignore TikTok. TikTok is something they're on all the time. We want to make sure that they know that we know how technology plays a role in their lives. If you check out my website, I have some lessons I've created for folks that you can download and use for any language. And one of them is about nomophobia. And nomophobia is the fear of not having your cell phone. That is a true thing that students feel nowadays, right? And so to make sure it's as real life as possible. Choose culturally relevant materials. Choices are in there again. Hook their interest with fun transitions and teach them how to monitor their skills. So one example would be if you have a rubric of any sort that you use when you you assess their listening, speaking, reading, writing, they can also self-assess using those rubrics, right? Again, it's not always the teacher giving the information. So every year they give this survey called the High School Survey of Student Engagement. And the most recent results that are available online are 2022. So I want you to take a look at what did these kids say about what they wish was going on in our classrooms. So the thing that stood out the most to me is they want to discuss more and debate more. They feel like they don't talk enough. They feel like they don't get to engage in the conversation as much. Now, if I was to make a prediction, I don't think I would have predicted that because that means they have to work harder, right, to be part of a discussion. But that's actually what they are looking for. And then, of course, 83% said they were sometimes or often bored. I think every kid's going to say they're bored on a survey because when they come in from school and you ask them what they did, they say nothing, right? And so that one doesn't bother me as much. But we do want to pay attention that they're looking for discussions and debates. They also like discussions where the answers are not clear and they want assignments that demand a lot of mental effort. Now, those of us in the classroom would say, there's no way kids ask for more, more thinking, that they have to do more thinking. That's actually something they ask for. This is an infographic from the middle school survey of engagement, and it came out very similar. If you go down to the bottom left, most engaging activities, group projects, discussions, and debates. And so even middle schoolers are telling us, let us do more. Instead of being just compliant and sitting back and passive, we want to take action in class. So what I'm going to do next is let's just go through some of the characteristics on the list that I took from Larry Ferlazzo's website. So celebrate who our students are. So this is an example of a teacher's room, and we know that no two snowflakes are the same. And so students are all represented by one of these snowflakes. And in Spanish, it says there, we're unique. We're all different. And it's that whole idea about how can we celebrate the diversity of learners in our classrooms? That some of you have previous experience with the language. Some of you came and you had zero experience. Some of you have traveled, and we're celebrating that diversity. It would be super boring if we were all exactly the same way, right? And so we want to make sure kids know that I am appreciating you as a teacher for what you're bringing to the classroom, and I'm going to take advantage of that to move you forward in your language learning. Here's another example of a level 1 Spanish teacher's bulletin board. And it says, we're celebrating our differences. And you can see the one with the flamingos there. There's one blue flamingo and then all the others are pink. And it says, be different. And so it can be very simple language. But the idea is that I'm different and that's okay. This is a great infographic. And this talks about how can we amplify student voice in the classroom, and just take a look at some of the pieces of advice they talk about. One that we don't give enough credit to is display student work on the walls and make sure you're putting up different students' work. So we're not always putting the same students' work up, but we're celebrating all the different students in the classroom. Put a spotlight on cultures, that they're bringing culture into the classroom with them. So it's just a great infographic to think about, well, how can I honor who my students are? This image comes from a book called All Learning is Social and Emotional by Fisher, Frey, and Smith. It's from ASCD. Fisher and Frey have all kinds of really good books from ASCD, like Checking for Understanding. I just have several of their books, but this one was specifically about social emotional. And notice that agency is one of the aspects they're telling us to make sure we're paying attention to. Recognizing kids' strengths, giving them self-confidence, giving them self-efficacy, having them think about having a growth mindset, having them feel resilient in my class. I apologize. I picked up a cold somewhere. Okay, so here's some examples of forms that we can use with students for them to think about, well, what do I bring to the class? Who am I? What gifts and talents am I bringing to the classroom? And so making sure we're talking about celebrating who everybody is, who each individual student is in our classroom. This one's about growth mindset. These are more mindset visuals. Are we talking about resilience? How do you stick to it? So if you don't do well, do you give up or do you keep trying? And a huge piece of language learning is mistakes help me learn. Mistakes are not a bad thing. And I ask kids to think back to when they were 2. Did you make perfect sentences? No. Did your parents understand what you were asking for? Yes. And so sometimes we may not have perfect accuracy, but I can be understood. There's a really cool thing called a resiliency quiz online from strongmindstrongkids.org. And here are some of the things kids think about, like, I encourage myself in stressful situations just as I'd encourage somebody else. And so for them to think about, how can I stick with it? How can I keep working and trying? I'm looking for something that makes my life meaningful, right? And so for them to think about, how do you keep going? How do you persevere when you're learning something new? So as we're thinking about building students' confidence on being language learners, we want them to spend also time reflecting and goal setting. So a really powerful way to do that is through peer feedback. And so if a student can tell another student what they could do to make their writing better, make their speaking performance better, whatever it is, again, it means they truly understand what it looks like to be proficient at the different levels. And so peer feedback is proving that a student understands the rubrics and the proficiency continuum because they wouldn't be able to give advice otherwise, right? And that we constantly maintain that focus on we are all growing. We don't all grow at the same rate. Not all plants grow at the same rate. Not all children grow at the same rate, right? And so to help students understand that you'll get there, it's just taking some people longer to get there, and that's okay. Here's an example from a level 1 middle school Spanish class where students are using the rubrics, and that's the white paper, to grade each other's work on the blue paper. And they're giving them feedback directly from the rubrics. Another way students can give feedback to each other is through little kind of protocols. So these are called 2 stars and a wish. So 2 things you did great, 1 thing you might want to do better. Again, on the left, I have an example of a student participation self-assessment. Every once in a while, I ask students to take this. This one on the left happens to be in Google Forms. Did you participate actively today? Did you volunteer to contribute to class today? Did you contribute meaningfully in class today? And so to think about what will help them become more proficient in language if they're actively participating in class. And there's an example of 2 stars and a wish on the bottom there. And then this is just an exit ticket I created for teachers to use, where instead of thinking about the learning that day, it's a bigger focus on how did you grow in your language proficiency today? So if you learned a new word or phrase, that's how you grew in your proficiency. If you made a mistake and you learned something from it, that's growing in proficiency. And so students would choose one of these blocks to reflect on how am I making sure I keep growing across that continuum. Here's an example of some meaningful feedback I might give students in the presentational mode. Practice combining some of your words so that you're making sentences. Try to use more variety in your vocabulary. Now, I would never give students more than one of these pieces of advice. I would give them a single piece because they can't deal with a whole lot of different things at once. So there's that one, add more details to your sentence. Tell me when and where it happened or who you were with. And so again, giving them really simple ideas to be able to continue to make their writing or speaking more proficient. That's important because an A, B, C, or a number grade is not going to help me know what should I do to increase my proficiency the next time. Okay, and then I want to talk a little bit about voice and choice. So choice. I, many years ago, had a exchange student stay with our family from France. And I still remember the first time I took her to an American grocery store. And we stood in the cereal aisle and she just looked up and down with her mouth open. And she said, "There are so many." You're right. We have an entire aisle in our grocery stores just for cereal. It's all rice, wheat, oats, bran, all those same things, but every color, every flavor, every shape, right? Our culture is based on choice. When I go to a restaurant, there is not one hamburger. There are multiple hamburgers. And so not offering choices is actually against the culture that the kids live in if you have American students. And so we know choice is motivated because if you let me choose between two things, I feel like I'm in control. And so I'll pick the one that I think I can do the best job with. It draws on their strengths and it gives them that sense of purpose and competence. Now, if you're familiar with UDL, UDL is the Universal Design for Learning. It's similar to differentiated instruction. And so and that's thinking about kids with special needs, kids, all different kinds of students, diverse learners in your classroom. And choice is one of the things that is recommended to meet the needs of diverse learners. So it's not just choice for fun, but it actually is proven in terms of research to be something that works for diverse learners. Here are two more little snippets I took out of Katie Novak's book, where she talks about giving kids options on the materials they use, on the way they're doing a task, any kind of options we can give them, empower them to be more motivated to do the task. Because I'll be honest with you, I work with teachers, and I can think of one in Delaware fairly recently who told me, he gives students a task to do and they'll say, "Yeah, I don't think I want to do that." Now, first of all, kids never used to say that out loud. Maybe they thought it, but they never said it out loud. Kids now are deciding, "Yeah, that doesn't interest me." What would happen if I gave that student an option? You can do this or you could do that. Might that change their attitude toward the task? So when we think about choice, just like agency, we can think of it as a continuum, right? So from the far left are ways that the teacher is more in charge. And as I move across the continuum to the right, the learner is more in charge. And so where am I right now in the choice continuum? So if I provide a menu of options and I provide choices, I'm down there on the left for participant, right? So The kid's a participant and the teacher does these things. So I'm living in that first column. How do I get the next column? Well, it says that kids are going to co-design the choices. So when I use choice boards with my students, the center board said your choice, the center block said your choice. And so that way they could come to me and say, well, I thought of another way I could show you I can do what it is we're learning how to do. What if I did this? And if it matches the goal of the task, that's awesome, because I can't think of every possible different way kids could show me, right? And so giving them the voice to do that is actually empowering. And so just think about how you'd like to move along that continuum of choice. So one way we can do that is through choice boards, right? And so choice board is basically like a bingo board that we give kids, and they get to choose something on the board to do. The one on the right here is a writing station in Spanish, and it says, when you come to the station, you can write a card, a poem, a letter, a list, or a story. Now, not only does the teacher give them those options, but she gives them an example of what that looks like. Do you see the little thing underneath each one? And so that way the student's like, well, it says I can write a letter, but I don't know what that looks like. There's an example right there. And so they have the choice. And you'll notice that on this particular list, obviously story would be the highest level proficiency. Here's some more examples of choices. Choices could be as simple as I'm opening up my lesson and kids get to choose a picture they want to describe. So let's say we were doing a unit on family or on clothing. And instead of just showing them one picture, I'm showing them 4. Now, it doesn't have to be 4. It could be 2. And then the students get to pick which one they want to describe based on, oh, that lady has on orange, and I forget how to say orange, so I'm not going to pick that one. That's fine, because I want them to show me what they know how to do. Over here on the bottom left is one of my newest favorite choice boards, and they're called This or That's. Why do I love them? Because there's only 2 choices. So it's not a big grid full of 16 choices, but it's only 2. And so you can choose to do this or that in the first column. Then the next time we bring out the choice board, they pick the top or the bottom for the second column, etc. And so for me, it's much more manageable than kids doing so many different tasks at once. And then there's that same continuum for student voice. So again, go down from the bottom. Students are allowed to offer their opinions. But now we're going to move to consultation. They take surveys and they provide input to the teacher. Then they attend activities to make decisions. And so you see, as you move along that continuum, students are more and more in charge. And so that's how we're expanding the amount of voice they have in our classrooms. So one example is simply making sure we're checking in with kids. The one on the left would be something I put into like a Google form. It would be private. Other students would not hear each other's answers. So I'm asking things like, is there anything you'd like me to know? What do you look forward to most in class? Do you need any help? Right? So every once in a while, I need to check in with kids to be for them, especially your introverted and intrapersonal kids that usually don't speak out or hang behind to ask you a question. Make sure we're asking those questions. On the right-hand side of this slide is a cutout from my book, my actual book of strategies, the keys to strategies for instruction. And this is where I ask them to rate the effectiveness of the different task types we do in class based on how well they help them learn. Now, of my 27 years in the classroom, 21 of them were in middle school. So if you teach middle school, yay. Some people think that that's crazy because they're like, how did you teach middle schoolers? But love middle schoolers. if you asked a middle schooler, what do you like? What kind of activities we do in class do you like? They're going to say none, right? So instead, it's important to couch it in. Tell me how effective these learning experiences are to your language learning. So which of these things help you learn best? Again, it puts the agency on the student. I like it when I get to work with a partner. I like it when we do games. I like it when I get to set goals, right? So kids are giving me feedback because if there's something I'm getting very low ratings from most of my students, why am I still doing that? It's not helping them learn. And they need to know that the feedback you're giving them is something you're actually reading and acting on. So often I'll put up a slide that said, you said blank, so I did this. So you said you wanted to do more partner work, so I added partner work to today's lesson so that they feel empowered that the feedback they gave you, you actually read and did something about. Here's another example of an exit ticket where I can collect information about how kids are doing. One thing I learned today was, one thing I want my teacher to know is there may be something going on one of your students' lives that you have no idea that it was going on, and it helps you understand why they were or were not participating in class or doing their assignments or whatever. Something from today's lesson I want to find out more about. That's actually saying to students, you know, the whole idea of positive presupposition, which is one of my favorite philosophies, is that we say to students, well, you clearly found something in the lesson that you want to find out more about. Tell me which one it was. And so the students are like, oh, I guess I should think about what it is I want to do. Something I found difficult. I really enjoyed this. I found today's lesson difficult because they're able to give that to you again privately so that they don't have to say in front of the whole class, I don't understand what we were doing. I'm sure you've seen these before. These are KWL charts. So what do I already know about this topic? What do I want to know about the topic? And then once we've done the whole unit, they go back and say, here's what I learned, right? And so it's that whole idea of them telling you, well, I already know this, I already know that. I know that's important because we can build on that prior knowledge. Or if they know something that is actually not correct, we can correct that, right? And here are some more examples of KWL charts. I also want you to see, this is from Williamson County, Tennessee's curriculum, their language curriculum. And I want you to see that the vocabulary we teach kids is not always static. We need to be flexible. For example, this is the activities unit, sports and activities. And the kids get to generate sports they want to know how to say. And so we might already have a list of sports we want to teach them, but it's possible the sports they actually do are not on that list. And how can they talk about themselves if it's not on the list? And so notice that it's kind of more on trend now. Instead of saying the only words you're going to learn in this unit are these 15, is to say, okay, that might be the core vocabulary or the priority vocabulary. But now I'm going to open it up and say, so now what other things do you want to know how to say? Well, I want to say Taekwondo. I want to say, right. And so whatever it is, we give them the words they need to express themselves. Also, we want to make sure, this is from a great book called Teach for Authentic Engagement. What about this unit makes you curious? What are you learning about in other places that this unit relates to? Trying to make those connections. What do you hope you can accomplish? And so again, making sure students feel like they have a say in what's going on, which is where we started. So a document I created several years back, I just call student input on a new unit. And this is where, before I teach a new topic, like let's say I'm teaching the topic of food next, I'm going to ask students ahead of time. I'm going to survey them about the unit that's coming up. I'm not going to ask them the day before we start the unit because that's not enough time for me to take what they told me and do something about, right? So this might be 2 weeks ahead or 3 weeks ahead. So here's the unit theme. Here are the big unit can-dos. I circled the one that interests me the most. What if no one circles anything? We might want to change those objectives, right? Because they don't seem interested in it at all. What interests me about this topic? How do I connect with this topic? What do I wonder about the target culture related to this topic? What words and phrases do I already know that I can use for this topic? What language will I need in order to communicate about this topic? What questions do I want to discuss with others? What real-world situations can I imagine myself using what I learn? So can they imagine themselves speaking with someone else in Hebrew about this topic? Where? At a restaurant? When they travel? Like, how is it going to be useful to them? And then the bottom one is projects I can create and ways I can take action and use my voice on this topic. So
just
yes.
clarification. So if you
Yes.
give them this, I see you have it in Hebrew.
Yes.
And this is me down there.
Yes.
Just to ask them, just to ask you if you're giving it to them to fill out in their language or in the target language. It depends, of course, of their level. But
Yes.
even though they're in a higher level, would you give them it in their target language?
I recommend something like this is done in their first language because kids aren't able to express themselves to the degree that they might want to on a form like this.
Mhm.
So as I shared, right after I put this out in the universe, Orly said, "Hi, I did this in Hebrew." And so you're not surprised, are you? And so here we go. That's what she sent me. Now, I do want to share with you some ways teachers have used this form. You don't have to use all the pieces to the form. This person is a Latin teacher, so they teach classical language, and they said, okay, we're going to talk about ancient Roman weddings. What interests you about that? What are you wondering about it? What words you already know? And so she just took pieces of it and put it together and got information from her students. Here's some more examples of feedback gotten from students from doing parts of this survey. The teachers who did these surveys that I have written in blue did a whole class filling out of the form. Instead of every kid filling it out, she conducted it where they all started giving ideas and she was recording it. So you can do it in a lot of different ways. So when you think about the units you teach, your lessons you teach, how can you increase that student voice through the theme, through the prompts you give them, through the resources you're using, through the vocabulary, through the projects you're giving them? How can you start implementing that student voice? Now, I do workshops on a whole lot of topics. And my whole thing about learning new things is that when you learn new strategies, we feel like it's just piling on top of all the other strategies we know. And so we feel like it's weighing us down. What you do is you try a strategy like increasing student agency. Then you're going to test it on 2 litmus tests. Did it positively impact student engagement in my classroom? And did it positively impact student learning? If it did, I'm going to keep that. If only one of those things was true, I'm going to adjust it. If neither of those things were true, I'm going to not use it. And so anytime you try out these new strategies, I don't want you to think that, oh, they're telling me I need to now add that on because we already feel weighed down enough. And so please, these are just ideas to get you thinking. Many of these ideas I'm talking about today, you probably are already doing and you feel good, you feel validated by them. And then other things I'm sharing with you today, you feel challenged by. Take one of those challenges and see how responding to that challenge might change the engagement in your classroom. All right. And so I just want to finish off with kids want to be able to take action with what they're learning. And so how am I making sure that students feel like, so for example, if you're doing a unit on environment, are we doing something about what's going on in the school environmentally? So are we trying to get more kids to recycle? Are we trying to, like, are we going to collect batteries to keep those out of the trash and things like that? What can they actually do? If I'm talking about food, are we collecting money to send somewhere where they need, where there's hunger problems, right? And so for them to be able to take action in some way. And then what do kids want to talk about? And so these are just screenshots of some of the Pinterest boards I have on different topics that are of interest to students. And you can explore those on your own if you like. It is very trendy right now. Many school systems, many districts are starting to align their curriculum to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And to be honest with you, between these 17 goals, there's not really a topic you could think of that doesn't fit under one of them. So it's not that hard to make it work. But again, it puts that it puts the emphasis on action and doing something. So it's not just learning food to be able to walk in the grocery store and say pear, peach, apple, banana, but instead we're talking about hunger and we're talking about food deserts and things like that. All right. And so are we making sure kids get authentic interactions with Hebrew speakers? So are we bringing in guest speakers? Are we bringing in community members? Are we visiting a store or a restaurant? Right? So how can I show them that they can use it outside of the classroom? And then we can also widen their worldview by talking about things like diversity and empathy and respect for others. Because if there's anything we need in this world right now is for us to really sharpen our empathy for others and our respect for others. All right. And so all I'm going to ask you to do as our final task is to now circle back to thinking about your lessons. And then which of these ideas do you feel like you could easily implement? And you don't want to suddenly, like, when you go back to your classroom, you're totally different because you attended this session, because the kids will say, like, what happened to you? Did you attend a professional learning or something? Right. And so we want to make sure that you see which one of these baby steps might make a difference in your teaching. And so I'm just closing with the idea of now, how are you going to be an agent of your students' agency, right? So how can I make that happen in my classroom? So if you're interested, the resources for today are at this link, and I can put the link in the chat, or you can take a picture of the QR code if you like, whichever works best for you. I'll put it in now, maybe. Okay, so if you take a look at that link, or you can use the QR code.
Yeah, thank you. Wow.
So I'm going to go to that link and I'll show you what's there. So if you're interested in all those learner agency graphics, I put them in a folder for you. And then here are all the different resources I shared. And there's particularly one called Links for Student Agency. And if you open that, you have a link to my website, to my Pinterest boards, and then specific resources that relate to some of the topics we talked about today. And so please feel free to visit them when you have a moment. You certainly don't have to visit them right now. And Morley, thank you so much for inviting me to spend time with you all. I really appreciate it, and I wish you all well.
תודה רבה. Thank you very, very much. If you have any questions, or do you want to say something, please open your mics.
It was amazing, really. You know what? I just thought about it. How many of my students will benefit by, having all these options and choices, and how much I will enjoy teaching when they will be able to choose and to put, to be themselves in the class, to have part of themselves in the class. And we always have to remember that, because when we started to teach, sometimes we forget.
Thank you. Anybody else?
No. I really appreciate your time, your knowledge, your resources. It's endless, really. Thank you so much for putting the effort to collect them, even in Hebrew. That's very happy. Thank you so much, Leslie.
Welcome.
I really appreciate you're here. And thank you everybody for attending. תודה לכולם שהייתם פה. סוף שנה שביעית. וואו, כברת
מזל טוב.
דרך עברנו. אז תודה רבה לכם. If you want to reach out to Leslie, please, you will know where to find her. You have all the links. So she has a very big heart, I can tell you that. So if you will reach out to her, she will immediately respond, I promise you. Thank you so much. And I want to wish all of you חופשה נעימה, happy summer. And if you're going to be in Israel during the summer, just let's connect, because I'm going. I thought I wouldn't go, but I will not go, but I decided to go. So let's be in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you. כל הכבוד.
תודה,
ביי.
תודה. ביי.
תודה רבה. ממש תודה. Thank you.
תודה רבה. ביי.
ביי, ביי, ביי.